Have you gotten an unsolicited offer to buy your practice recently? Well, you may not have realized it, or maybe you did, but if you didn't, that's a signal that your local market might be attractive for you to go buy, even if it's spreading out, even if it's, second location, third location. Somebody just told you, somebody who probably pays good attention to your market just told you that it's attractive to buy. So you could become the buyer instead. But what do you do then? Well, my guest today helps his clients buy practices, acquire practices, all sorts of other things. He's going to tell us what he thinks to help you get started. I'm Carl White, principal at Market Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of Practice Care. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private, what we're definitely going to be talking about today. That's usually what you want anyway, but let's face it, care is better when it's the providers of care who own the practice, because then all decisions, clinical, business, whatever they may be, are made by those who are providing care for patients. So we can feel very confident and rest assured that patient care will always stay top of mind. My guest today, my returning guest, is E.J. Cyran. E.J. has spent over a decade as a healthcare attorney, which means he represents physicians, dentists, and their practices in a bunch of things: negotiating vendor agreements, buying or selling their practice, handling associate buy-ins, and getting advice on their regulatory and payer issues. He knows his way around HIPAA, telehealth, Medicare, and all other matters affecting healthcare practices. He is the go-to lawyer for his clients. E.J., welcome back.
Thank you, Carl. It's great to be here.
It's good to have you back. Yeah, it's been a little bit, so it's good to get reconnected and talk about a counterintuitive topic, something I'll bet you most people don't think about. It took me a minute to wrap my head around it as well, as we went through before we started recording. And we're going to get into it. But first, as I start with all episodes, everyone, for those who haven't listened to an episode with you before, tell us more about you, about your firm. Help us get to know you.
Absolutely. So again, my name is E.J. Cyran. I'm a partner at Fox Rothschild in the Health Law Group. What we do is serve healthcare providers as their outside counsel, and to some extent businesses as well that aren't healthcare providers but serve those healthcare providers. So we understand all the different facets of the industry from all those players in the industry. And we are their go-to counsel for everything they need. They call us for corporate employment, even litigation matters, but we focus on, and I specifically focus on, handling all of those things that come up in their business. And that includes M&A, right? That includes, I got a solicitation from a private equity group or a healthcare system to buy my practice. And I want to know, is this a good deal, right? I get that question a lot. I get questions about multiples, et cetera. Multiples are obviously a valuation issue and not a legal one. But people want to know, what's the value of my practice? And what does that mean? And I think that the better question that I've learned over the years in representing these clients and seeing the trajectory that they go on is not so much what the value of my practice is, but rather what do I really want for my future, right? And that is a very different way of looking at certainly everybody who gets a big check in selling their practice is happy to have a check. And they want to go spend that money, and they do. But 12 to 24 months later, it's usually when they're unhappy or there's something they're dissatisfied about. And that leads to, going back in time in hindsight and saying, well, what could we have done better here? What was the better path? If it wasn't to join private equity or the healthcare system and get that big check, what is the better path for me as a private practice owner?
And so, which is a wonderful red carpet in. So let's jump in. So you get this offer to buy your practice or, some notice of interest. And, why take the meeting if you're not sure? Like the counter. So, you want to find out what they know, but why? So they call you and you say, go take the meeting. What do you tell them?
I tell them, well, I want to talk to them about what their interests are, right? And I try to address that point that we just talked about right up front. But usually the advice is going to be take the meeting, sure. Ask some more questions if you got an inquiry or a letter of intent even. You want to do what I call reverse due diligence as the seller. Everybody, when they talk about due diligence, gets so obsessed with, oh, I got to produce all these documents. I'm going to get all these questions. Well, put it aside to a minute from the seller's point of view. You want to know who are these buyers? Where does their money come from? What's their track record? And what's their goal, right?
Mhm.
Or what are their goals if there are multiple ones? From private equity perspective, it's pretty straightforward what their goal is. In 5 to 7 years is a typical horizon. They're looking to resell what they have. So they're going to roll things up, meaning they're going to buy all these different practices in a particular specialty, maybe in a certain region or regions, and then they're going to sell it to someone else. They are not
Mhm.
interested, like you would be, in owning your practice for the long term.
Mhm.
And so to them, although they're going to have a brand that they have some care about, right? Because it impacts how, the value that they can sell in 5 to 7 years. The bottom line is they're still selling in that time frame.
Yeah.
That's what the deployment of the money, the millions and millions of dollars from this private equity fund is driven by. And there's no negotiation of that. It's not like they're going to say, okay, well, we're going to hang on to it for another 7 years. They're
Yeah.
looking to get out and then reinvest money somewhere else. They're coming from different industries. That's an important thing to understand,
Mhm.
right? They often will have maybe one or two prior experiences with healthcare in general. They're usually coming from other industries. And so they just apply everything that they know from other industries and doing roll ups or whatever it may be,
Yeah.
plumbing companies, whatever it is, they've done it and they think they can just do it again. And they
Yeah.
think the answer is let's centralize, let's save money. We can do so much better than these professionals can do managing their practice. That cost cutting is what's going to get us the multiple we want to sell in 5 to 7 years. The God's honest truth is it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so
Wow.
that's what creates the problems is that they come in thinking they're going to be able to cut costs, which is of course not what you want to see in your
Mhm.
practice, to simply cut costs. I mean, sure, cut costs wisely,
Mhm.
but not just to create the margin, the profit
Yeah.
margin to make this attractive. You want this to be grown from a revenue perspective. You want this brand to be developed, and you want to still be in control of the practice of medicine
Yeah.
with these patients, and they aren't seeing it the same way. Now, they might say certain things, and that's what you want to watch out for in this meeting and the back and forth in emails, etc. What is it the private equity sponsors that you're really talking to, and are they giving you a spiel? Is there a broker involved? Is that broker trying to tell you, or an intermediary of some sort trying to tell you certain things? You can't really trust those people because all they're trying to do is close the deal, right?
Yeah.
And then the private equity sponsors, again, they're usually going to have a spiel. Can you get past that? And you want to ask those questions of, you know, what has been their track record? What documentation, what materials do they have that they can show you? And then when you see things like a slide deck, ask questions about the supporting documentation, the data behind the graphs and all this stuff, because it's all they're in a
It's
sales
quite
pitch.
massaged.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
can take
And you
data,
really,
as you know, Dr. X listener, you can take data and make it say a bunch of different things. You
exactly.
can. But
One of the
let's
things,
let's
go
let's
ahead.
just go back a bit. Say, all right, if your mindset is you get this unsolicited offer, it just sort of shows up one day and they want a meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you, I'll tell you what I would do and then why. I wouldn't prepare at all. Say, all right, you guys wanted this meeting. But my only preparation, I guess, would be let me see what they know about my market and about not to like quiz them, but maybe it's an attractive market. Maybe to get to our point, maybe I should think about buying. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
they make some good points. That'd be my preparation. The reason I say that is once in my prior career, I was called into a meeting. I was on this team. It was back in business school, and we were called to a meeting by a bunch of faculty, and they called it and we didn't prepare anything. And then they got mad at us because we didn't prepare and use the meeting wisely. I remember calling on my father afterwards. He owned a business. And I said, Dad, when's the last time somebody called you to a meeting and expected you? When's the last time you called a meeting and expected the people you called to run it? He said, never. I said, exactly. But that just happened to me. And I'm so angry. I was on the losing end of it. I mean, it wasn't bad, um, but somebody calls you to a meeting, figure out what you want out of it. But the point of this episode, listeners, is to say maybe you just got a good piece of market knowledge that you just weren't even looking for. And so take that part seriously. Forget their numbers and what they say, I guess, but why this region? What do you guys see?
Exactly.
All I see is competition. What do you guys, you have to be kind of savvy about it, but if your mission is maybe I should go buy another location.
Right. How
I mean,
did
if
they
they're
work?
willing to buy, then maybe it's buyable. Maybe I should do the same thing, right?
Right. So if they're going to roll up, on this particular region, you know, how are they going to grow that value? How are they
Hmm.
going to grow that revenue? What's their plan? How are they planning to compete? And those are great questions to ask.
Hmm.
It's also, I think, a good idea to ask, and maybe obviously not in the first conversation, but maybe the second, soon after, can I speak with, a physician owner of another practice you recently acquired?
Hmm.
And really talk to them about how are things going, right?
Hmm.
And if they're early on, you're not going to get great answers, other than maybe with regard to how the transaction itself was completed and whether or
Hmm.
not that was smooth.
Hmm.
But if they've been there for at least a year, 2 years, they're going to have good answers for you, and you're going to have a much better sense of how is this private equity firm actually managing,
Hmm.
right? Do they know what it means to centrally manage medical practices? And a lot of them honestly don't do a great job of that. That's probably
Hmm.
the biggest complaint that we get is, hey, we hired you to bill correctly, right? To collect,
Hmm.
to manage the staff appropriately, and you're not doing that. Or
Hmm.
you're absent. Your staff aren't answering phone calls.
Hmm.
That stuff, it matters. And because you never had to deal with that nonsense before in
Hmm.
managing your practice. This was all a very flat structure, internalized. You knew these people personality wise, you knew all your staff, your middle management very well, and
Hmm.
you were in communication with them. These are people who are off-site, probably out of state, and
Yeah.
there aren't that many of them, and they're responsible for handling a lot of different practices,
Yeah.
at the same time. So getting answers is not necessarily an easy thing when you think it should.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've got some stories of those who sold, and we're zeroing a lot in private equity, and but large buyers, I'll go on a limb and say the story isn't terribly different, whether it's a private equity large buyer or a hospital system large buyer. The motivation's the same. If you're insurance based, you can negotiate better rates because you're larger, but not massively. It's still going to be a margin play. It's still going to be a cost cutting play. You can cut costs tomorrow. You can't renegotiate your contracts until next year. And you're going to do both anyway, centralizing things. So, um, I hear the anecdote every once in a while of somebody who sold, went in, and now they're coming back out because they're not so happy with the life that they sold into, I guess. Tell us, what do you see with that?
Well, they want to exit, right? But they usually can't
Yeah.
because of the non-compete restrictive covenants, non-solicitation covenants in place. And there's the fact that they were paid, right? They were paid usually a large sum.
Hmm.
Um, Larger if it's private equity than healthcare system, but it's still a large sum. And,
Hmm.
they're not ready to pay that back, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I actually have one scenario where they are very seriously considering paying that back, but the way they're doing it, because it's obviously way too much money for the physicians to come up with and just turn over as a larger practice, is that another buyer, a healthcare system is going to come in and acquire their ongoing practice and pay,
Mm.
the private equity group that had bought them before. And it was only a few years ago, but they're still, they realize now they've seen enough. This is not the right future for them with this
Hmm.
private equity management company. They're doing a terrible job. We're actually doing a forensic accounting investigation of them as to
Wow.
their failures in properly allocating funds to this practice, and collecting them appropriately, waiting too long to bill and collect so that some claims, were lost, because there are timeframes where you have to bill the payers.
Mm.
Uh, or they were incorrectly done, they were sent in but incorrectly done, and so the time frame has run. There's dangers here that even well established, in this case it was a well established, a known management company, private equity backed, doesn't know what they're doing, or they're in over their heads, right? They're just overwhelmed with, from an administrative standpoint, and the staff that they have,
Yeah.
because they're trying to keep their costs low. They're overwhelmed with it, and they can't manage these practices the way that it should be done. So it's a combination of not knowing what to do, but then also being overwhelmed and not being able to get it all done. And I think from a healthcare system perspective, it is a little different. You're becoming part of a culture, a long-standing culture there that's not going to exist with a private equity group. Again, they're in and they're
Hmm.
out, right?
Hmm.
a brand, that's a different concept of brand. But when you're joining a healthcare system, you are joining a long historical culture that this has been around for a while. Even if it's been acquired by another health system, it's still a hospital, and its ancillary services have been around for a long time in a particular,
Yeah.
right? And they have their way of doing things, and they can be very rigid, etc. And that's hard,
Yeah.
right? But they should know how to bill better than the private equity group. Whether or not they have enough staff, yeah, that's a different point. But you're joining a culture, and so you need to understand that. You need to understand what that means,
Mhm.
whether you're going to feel comfortable with that.
Yeah. So let's flip now to say, all right, you say, maybe I should be buying. I mean, maybe I just learned something about my market, my specialty in my market. Maybe I should be buying. How do there's so many questions in there. How would I even afford it? How do I look? Who do I look for? How do I do that? How do you can you break that just the beginnings of breaking it down? Because it can seem it's nothing you thought of, right? It's certainly, conceptually easier to sell than to buy. Um, sort of, I guess. Having not done neither, maybe I should retract that. But so how do you even, that's a mindset shift. How do you even
Well,
get going on
I
that?
again, it has to match you as the physician practice owner, right? Are you
Yeah.
an entrepreneurial person? Are you someone who is on the younger side and has 20 years left, or
Hmm.
15 to 20 years left, or even 10? If you're going to be retiring the next 3 to 5 years, obviously this doesn't really make much sense.
Hmm.
I have a client that tried to do that. They're still working through it, but they want to sell to private equity. They just wanted to get a little bit larger, and there is something to say about, hey, my EBITDA, my earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, your net income, right? Which the multiple is going to be based on for
Hmm.
private equity is not high enough, and I can't really grow it in the next couple of years by just trying to squeeze referral sources, get more patients, and hire a few more associate physicians. It's not going to work.
Hmm.
So what can I do? Well, you could take this kind of approach to try to acquire smaller practices than yours, in the hopes that it would result in a larger EBITDA in a few years, and you'd be more attractive. But sometimes there are challenges that on that short term horizon create problems, and you're still waiting
Yeah.
on somebody else.
Probably
You're
not a
still
probably
waiting
not a
on
great idea.
the
Probably not a
private
great idea.
equity group, right?
Yeah.
To really like you, and who wants to buy you. So it's really more a question of time frame and where you are in your career first. And if you
Hmm.
feel that that matches you, that hey, you're not ready to be retired in the next 3 to 5 years. You don't want just a big check and to then have a fixed salary for the rest of your life, with a productivity bonus. And then, by the way, you know, have to be dealing with different owners in
Hmm.
7 years, something like that. And then, of course, there's the whole second bite of the apple concept that the private equity sponsors are going to wave in front of you, as a carrot that, hey, if you roll over some of your assets into our, or we're going to require you to roll over some of it because we don't have the money to pay for the full practice, then you'll get to participate in that second sale, the one that we're aiming for. You're going to get to participate in. I
Oh
can't tell
God.
you how many times those physicians come back and say, "Hey, it hasn't happened yet." They said it was going to happen in 3 years. It hasn't happened, and
Hmm.
we're tired of this. That was part of our value that we didn't
Hmm.
get paid for up
Hmm.
front, with the promise that we were going to get paid on a higher multiple later on. It's not happening. And the way that they're managing, I don't know that this thing's going to have as much
Yeah.
value as they thought it was. So there's a lot of dissatisfaction there too.
Yeah.
So instead of going for the second bite of the apple and taking money now, if your time frame matches, you should very seriously consider being them,
Hmm.
doing what they're doing, because you know how to manage a practice much better than they do,
Yeah.
right? You know how to manage the professional staff. You know
Yeah.
how to manage the non-clinical staff. You your team knows how to do billing and coding and
Hmm.
and collections. So you should be the one that benefits from the same kind of entrepreneurial approach that they're taking, the
Hmm.
value they're seeing in the market, in your region.
Hmm.
What can that allow you to do? You can leverage more locations, more providers for
Hmm.
better reimbursement rates from payers over
Yes.
time, as you're saying.
Yes.
Every year you can renegotiate, right? You can leverage it for better purchase prices and rates for supplies with vendors,
Mm-hmm.
right? That can cut your costs,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whereas the reimbursement rates can actually increase your revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And then the goal long term is, yeah, you probably will end up having to sell. I mean, certainly you would want to get a high value and a check when you are ready to be retiring in the next 3 to 5 years for
Yeah.
your practice, right? And at that point in time, if you've done this, you've taken this approach, you're going to have acquired many different locations. And maybe that includes only 3 or 4 transactions because each of those practices had 2 or 3 locations.
Yeah.
But you've expanded in a way that you never would have expanded organically, right?
Mm-hmm.
With just your one practice. And you probably were able to do so at reasonable prices and value compared to what it ends up being in 10 years worth. And then you are able to get that benefit of selling. Now, we can talk about how that process can work and how it has to be structured because
Mm-hmm.
in some ways it's a merger, right? In some ways you're
Mm-hmm.
bringing in these other physicians and their
Mm-hmm.
practices,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want to lose that value.
Right.
You always want to be adding as a rising tide lifts all boats. So that has to do with how the ownership would work.
Sure. But that can all be figured out.
For sure.
That can all be figured out. And you're right.
With
You'll be
knowledgeable counsel.
correct.
Yeah.
Among other things. That's right. Yeah, like you buy a second location, you've got to figure out, do you bring it under your brand? Do you, how do you do this? I've watched 2 practices. I don't have the breadth of experience you do, but I've watched 2 practices acquire, and from just a sort of a local market recognition, one do it, I think, very well, and one do it poorly. The one that did it poorly bought a practice that was 30 years in the community. Everybody knew it. And on day one, changed the name, even changed the website, the domain, everything. And essentially threw away 30 years of local market recognition. The other one bought in, changed nothing for like the first year or so. In fact, didn't add his name to the name of the practice until a few patients said, "So when are you going to add your name, man? You're the one here now." So he just, maybe a little too caught, but better, the much better spirit. I mean, all those things can be figured out. But one of the reasons why you would buy into a local market is it's an attractive growing market, and whoever you're buying, as far as you can tell, runs a good practice and is, profitable. Or you see something they don't, whatever, but I mean, maybe not. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. I'll bet EJ, you've got somebody who makes their first acquisition probably kind of clumsy. Their third or fourth, they're getting good at it.
Absolutely.
You know?
And so are their management staff, whoever they have in place. And it does help to have a good practice manager, right? Somebody who is ready for this. I mean, you have to talk with them about it. You have to know that they're going to be able to help, or you're kind of limiting your targets, right? Because then you would need, if your own practice manager is not going to be able to handle being in charge of 2 locations, 3 locations, 4 locations, 5, then you're probably going to have that target's practice manager handle that location, right?
Yeah.
So you have to feel comfortable then with who that is, and that'll be part of your due diligence, and maybe it's more difficult to find in your region.
Yeah.
But there is obviously the challenge of funding, right? That's the first thing that my clients always bring up when we talk about this. Well, the difference between me and the private equity group, aside from the fact that I know how to manage better, is I don't have the funding, they do, right? So how do I go about expanding? How do I go about being the entrepreneur and the acquirer here?
Yeah.
And of course, with interest rates being the way they have for several years, bank loans are kind of a last resort, right? You can certainly get them. You can get them for part of a deal, but you don't want to be beholden with all this debt to a bank. So
I mean, unless, yes, but not all debt's bad, but yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It can't all be done by debt. You can't just take out loans for every one of these acquisitions. In fact, it might be very difficult for you to even get the funding to cover all of the purchase price.
Okay.
So what other options exist? Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that you want to be buying practices that are either your size or less, right? Or smaller.
Mhm.
That's how you want to start, and preferably smaller to start, right?
Okay.
So when you're dealing with a smaller practice, you might be dealing with a solo practitioner. That's a
Mhm.
good, it's a simpler way to do this, especially to get your feet wet.
Mhm.
And with solo practitioners, you know, to them, they're at some stage of their career too, right? It's just one person you're dealing with. You're not dealing with 3 or 4 owners, right? And it, either they're 3 to 5 years to retirement or they're longer, right?
Mhm.
And if they're just 3 to 5 years to retirement, they might actually be interested, right? Because they don't want to end up in 2 to 3 years without a buyer, right?
Mhm.
So they might actually be interested in a seller financing way of becoming part of your enterprise. They might be willing to take on the risk of a note from you, a promissory note, where they're basically loaning you the money
Mm.
at an agreed upon interest rate that wouldn't be as high as the bank. And you are going to pay them in some sort of agreed upon model.
Mhm.
It's maybe you just pay them interest only for a year or something like that, right? But
Mhm.
they know that they feel comfortable with your practice being larger than theirs, that you're going to be long
Mhm.
term around, and you'll be able to pay this seller financing back to them, right?
Mhm.
And again, I don't think that there could be scenarios where you find a solo practitioner that'll take it all on seller financing. I think it can be a good part of the
Yeah.
purchase price here. Maybe that goes along with the loan. Another thing you can do is have them contribute if you wanted to, and this is better for those physicians who are going to be practicing for longer than a couple
Yeah.
years. You can have them become part of this whole enterprise as an owner. And
Mhm.
then in the long term, they can benefit not from the second bite of the apple, but
Yeah.
for the first bite, right? When you
Yeah.
actually do sell it.
Yeah.
And the question is, well, how do you make them an owner with you? And there are a few ways to do that, but I think a good way to think about it is to do what the private equity group would do, which is create a management company. As a physician, you can own a management company. There's no
Mhm.
problem with that. And in fact, with the corporate practice of medicine challenges that exist in many states, it helps a ton for the physicians to be owners in the management company, especially majority owners. And, from a management fee standpoint, your risks are lower. So, being able to take the profit of the practice as a management fee is more realistic when you have physician owners in a management company. So you would want to be the majority owner or the vast majority owner, of course, but
Mhm.
maybe you have them contribute some of their assets, just like the private equity group would ask you to do, to this new management company that you're going to form.
Mhm.
And then in exchange, they will receive a small ownership percentage, right?
It's neat because you could say, let's give private equity some credit. They know how to structure sales and purchases.
Sure.
So why not just take the structures that they seem to offer to everybody and do it yourself?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm.
So you could do that. You could combine that with a little seller financing too.
Mhm.
And then another option is to find some smaller scale investors who aren't physicians, but who are interested in your enterprise, in your future, in your business plan, right?
Mhm.
And say, you know what, this makes sense. And, maybe I have experience with management, or maybe I just have some wealth I want to invest. And I'm happy to contribute to this, right? And they can become an owner in the management company in exchange for monetary contributions,
Right.
and then you have some funding, right, that
Mhm.
you can use to acquire. So I think those are the most likely scenarios for
Mhm.
finding the funding, but it's not impossible, and especially because we're talking about smaller practices, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about acquiring those that are smaller than yours or of even size, and then it creates a snowball effect, right?
Mhm.
How does this develop over the years? The sky's kind of the limit with it. Um, and those financing options are they're only going to improve over time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. As you build a track record, you have more capital available.
Mhm.
Exactly. Okay. Um, it seems to me it's more of a comment, but react to it. It's just like a lot of other things. If you're going to do this well, you need to know your local market. Who are these other practice owners? What's their time horizon? Type of people do they seem like? Like the day that you get this unsolicited offer, you say, I should go buy instead. They just taught me something. Man, it would help if you had some local market knowledge already. So, you know, go to your professional, like, get to know these people, get to know those in your area. There is kind of a common enemy of the private equity / hospital health system buyer. So you can open the kimono a little bit to each other, and at least your own visions, your own, like, I wonder if there's any correlation in your experience between, the sales that go through well and those who kind of knew their market already versus those who did not. Do
Well,
you see
knowing your
that?
market in the way that you're talking about, as far as knowing their fellow colleagues,
Yeah.
right? And having met them before, maybe they have a history with them, having gone to school with them, or doing a residency with them, or fellowship, or something like that. But they are aware of them. They have communicated with them over the years, and so there's
Mhm.
this acquaintanceship at least there.
Mhm.
I think that absolutely helps. I you know that sort of leads toward that model where I was talking about, where they might want to be smaller owners, minority
Mhm.
owners in the enterprise long
Mhm.
term, and be a part of this with you. And you might be wondering about control, right, in this scenario, and
Mhm.
management, and how that works. And all this stuff can be customized,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of it's going to have to do with leverage of the seller, the target that you're looking to acquire,
Yeah.
right? You're in a scenario where you're not just going to be able to throw money at it,
Mhm.
but at the same time, what you're trying to do here, you can't forget, which is, for your personal future, for your personal career path, what makes the most sense?
Mhm.
You know, what is going to make you the happiest? It's going to be the meaningful relationships, the meaningful business growth, the fact that you are leading this,
Mhm.
and you're still maintaining or improving patient experience and patient care, and that if something comes up, you can easily jump in and
Mhm.
address it. And you're not beholden by a private equity group that might say, well, I don't want to spend any money on that
Mhm.
because I got to sell this in a year and a half.
Yeah.
Like that, and that's
Yeah.
the kind of stuff that creates major dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
Maybe you need some new equipment. Maybe you don't need it, but it's the right thing that you could bring in this new ancillary service and make a ton of money.
Mhm.
But it's going to require a little bit of an investment,
Right.
and you're not the one who can make that decision.
Right.
Um, and you think, well, if it's more money, the private equity group's going to want to do it. Not necessarily. It depends on the expense and the horizon for them,
Yeah.
right? That's all they're really focusing on. So, as we talk more and more about this, there are all these scenarios that come up that you can see how, okay, I need to really step back when I get that offer or that interest, and this is the first time, perhaps in my career, I need to look at, what do I have,
Yeah.
and what could this be?
Yeah. And I wonder, what kind of experience do you have with, like, so you're representing the private practice that's trying to acquire another one, but you're competing with much bigger pockets, private equity
Right.
pockets. How do you compete? How do you compete when your pile of cash is smaller when you're going to buy something?
Well, it's going to be, the fact that you are a physician and that you know how to manage these practices and they don't. And
Hmm.
it's also going to be, what can you offer to them as far as, being an owner.
Hmm.
Maybe they have some control over their location. You can customize this completely, really.
Hmm.
It's not just a cookie cutter thing at all.
Hmm.
And then, you know, you're never going to be able to convince somebody who wants a check to join you, instead of the private.
If it's check
It's
only, it's true. Yeah.
it's not going to happen, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if they want the big check because they want to buy a boat, or they want to go buy or several boats, or they want to go buy a second home and stuff. There's only so much you can offer them. Now, maybe you can offer them enough. Again, it's gray. We're talking about the margins here. Maybe you can offer them enough, including with the long-term perspective in
Hmm.
view,
Yeah.
that they are comfortable with that. But if somebody's going to retire in the next 3 years, unless they're a small solo practitioner, much more likely that the private equity group wouldn't want them anyway.
Yeah.
So they're better targets to start off, especially
Yeah.
maybe 2 to 3 physicians. I mean, when you add physician owners, you really quickly get to much higher revenue, because there can be more associates, there can be
Hmm.
more physician extenders, nurse practitioners, physician assistants that are being supervised, and they're really driving revenue,
Hmm.
right? So, when you get to three, when you get to 4, you're at a much different type of
Mm,
practice than at 1 or 2.
yeah. And it really, I guess it goes back to get to know your local market colleagues. So,
Mhm.
because if it's just about the money, yeah, it's hard and the biggest check wins. But if there are intangibles that matter, you're going to get a big check from me, but we will preserve the legacy. We, just like you were saying, we know how to run a practice, and a lot of these private equities know how to cut costs, um, sometimes smartly, sometimes not. I guess, potential acquired, it really just depends. If you want a good size check and knowledge that your name will continue or your legacy, or not, it's at that point it's your call. But yeah, because if you can't, we've had a few episodes over the years where if you can't compete on money, how do you compete then? And it typically comes back to vision, culture, continuity, quality of life, these other non-tangibles that some people react to and some do not. And if you show up and, knock on their door one day and you've never met them before, hey, want to sell and my check's not going to be the largest, it's probably not going to be a very productive meeting. you
Yeah.
know. So, but if you
Yeah,
know
and
them a little bit,
you have to understand that legacy, that vision, that culture that you've built,
yeah,
you get acquired by a private equity group, that no matter what they say, it's a
doesn't matter.
rarity that that continues.
Yeah. Yeah. And the whole
So
second bite of the apple, again, a few episodes over the years.
yeah,
I can say two things about the bite of the apple. One is everyone, just like you, has said, and then there's a second bite of the apple. And the second thing they say is, and it never comes along. It never turns into reality. Um, it's just some sort of promise about the future.
right. I mean, the bottom line is, and I've seen this happen, the private equity groups are going to get out because they have their horizon. And
Mhm.
that's not necessarily a good thing, right?
Mhm.
Just because that they're going to sell to somebody else doesn't mean that they're actually going to make much money. They might
Mhm.
not make much money at all.
Mhm.
They might take a loss, or they might
Mhm.
just break even or gain, have a very small profit. And just because they found a buyer is good enough for them, because the people behind the fund, right, are looking to deploy hundreds of millions of dollars. And
Mhm.
if something's not performing after 5 to 7 years, they don't want their money in that fund anymore.
That's
They
right.
want it out and they want it deployed somewhere else.
Yeah.
So you have to understand the bigger picture with it. And then it makes sense. It makes total sense that I can't trust these people. They're doing a flip. They're kind of like flipping a house, but on a
Yeah.
longer time scale.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not going to maintain culture. It's not going to maintain how that house used to look, even if it had a quaint aspect to it and a historic aspect to it that a lot of people like. It's
Yeah.
just not going to be maintained any longer than they absolutely need it to. So I think that perspective is helpful. It's critical, really.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you get pulled into this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth that is very difficult to get out of because there's a carrot being waved in front of your face.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe the way to look at it is, if I were to build a practice from scratch, would I build it in the way in which they are now running mine? And if the answer is no, then I suppose at least don't go work for them for a few years as part of your agreement, because you just knowingly stepped into something you would never run the same way. Um, and then ask yourself, why would I sell what I've built to that? I know they're going to wreck it. Just don't know exactly how fast. Um, so yeah. And then look around, become a buyer of somebody else. Maybe that's part of your story. We have covered a lot of ground. Man, we have covered a lot of ground. Uh, Not a small topic we're taking on. With the understanding we could talk for a lot longer. Is there, but we can't. Anything crucial you think we missed?
I would say, local doesn't mean just the community. The community is certainly important, right?
Hmm.
And around a major city, that's a pretty big community,
Yeah.
right? But local, and we see this all the time in the Northeast, Mid Atlantic, you know, it can mean states, right? You're
Hmm.
talking about the entire state, or you're talking about crossing state borders even.
Hmm.
And you can create another practice, or you can use the same practice in certain instances that is a foreign business registered in a neighboring state, and you can continue to expand.
Hmm.
You should look at local as meaning regional,
Hmm.
as meaning potentially a state or multiple states. And then when you get out west, of course, the states are bigger, but it's much more rural, right?
Yeah.
So that makes sense too.
Mm-hmm.
Now it may be more difficult to manage farther away,
Mm-hmm.
but there are also probably some interesting opportunities, to work with a practice that's owned only an hour from you or 2 hours
Mm-hmm.
from you, but even though it's 100 miles,
Yeah.
they're doing the same thing you're doing, but they're servicing communities you'd never be able to service,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so they're not really a competitor of yours. They're just expanding
Mm-hmm.
your reach,
Mm-hmm.
your as an enterprise reach, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there might be some great collaboration opportunities. And again, it's I like how you phrased it, that it's you guys versus the Goliaths that are coming, that
Mm-hmm.
are here and that aren't going anywhere. But you don't have to be subsumed into them, right? You
No.
don't have to be acquired by them. It is really something that, unless you're just trying to retire, it's
Yeah.
really something that you can avoid. And this is the way to not just avoid it, but to capitalize on
Correct. And by the way, there is a third option: do nothing. Neither buy
it.
nor sell. Take the meeting though. See what you can glean.
Right.
What's the harm in an hour meeting where you'll pick up something. At least you'll learn about them. Prep for it. Have your own goals. They're going to come to talk to you about selling to them. That's fine. I have my own goals.
Right.
There's 6 questions I have. And if they don't answer them, get up and leave. You called me here. What do you mean? You guys called me here. You've run the meeting, so yeah, absolutely. So let's say, the scenario of this next question is always the same. So somebody, a listener got a call recently, um, or they want to get more in the buyer's mindset just in case. It's a large topic. So what's a good, super simple place to start, would you say?
As far as if you get a call from private equity, you're saying?
Yeah, or getting ready for the context of like one thing I'll throw out there is, if listener, if you've never had a coffee with any of your kind of local market competitors, change that. Go
Oh
meet
yeah,
them.
absolutely.
Just
Right.
go
Get out.
get to know your guys are collegial. There's cutthroat out there. You don't have to be that way. Go get to know them.
That's right. You don't
Yeah.
have to be competitors. And in states where you have that distance, make the trip, meet these people, learn how they do what they do. And you might just learn some things that you can apply in your own practice.
Hmm.
You're not competitors, you're so far away, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But even locally, really close, the competitors, I do think there is that safety in numbers approach. If you take that with them, that's your intention,
Hmm.
right? And you're learning how to better your practice, improve your practice, and same with them.
Hmm.
They're going to be open to that,
Hmm.
most likely, especially if they're close to you in age, within 10 years of your
Yeah.
age.
Yeah.
They're going to be willing to do that.
Yeah.
And then as far as the private equity group giving you that call, I think what you said is exactly right, and we talked about the meeting to have. But you want to have a good advisor on your side.
Mm.
Sometimes accountants are very helpful at giving you valuation for your practice and giving you that sense. They're not so much helpful in understanding the structure or what your
Yeah.
options may be. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't.
Hmm.
And then same thing goes for lawyers. If it's not a healthcare lawyer, you know, even if it's a deal lawyer, there's only so much perspective they can offer.
Hmm.
And it's the people who do this all the time that really understand, what the dynamics are. And so you may very quickly get yourself into a letter of intent scenario. And at that point in time, I always say to my clients, prospective clients, come see me.
Hmm.
When you've got a letter of intent
Hmm.
and you're going to consider signing it, don't sign it
Yeah.
until knowledgeable counsel is involved, because that letter of intent needs to be negotiated. There's an exclusivity period that's going to be binding, no matter what people say about it not being binding. There
Yeah.
are parts of it that are.
Yeah.
Exclusivity is one, confidentiality is another, but you need to be clear in this letter of intent about what the terms are going to be for this deal. You don't want them, you want to make it more difficult for them to be changing those terms later.
Hmm.
Um, you need to be asking the right questions at that point in time
Hmm.
before you sign it, not after they've done their due diligence and they're
Yeah.
ready to reduce your purchase price.
Yeah.
You need to know that this is likely a match for me.
Yeah.
You go down that path.
Yeah, and this is, I get this opportunity every once in a while to remake this point, but this is where you need a healthcare attorney. You know, selling a medical practice to somebody else is different than selling a restaurant to somebody else. There are plenty of good corporate attorneys out there who know about all these things. The questions you ask, the wrinkles only come from the experience of, merging billers. I don't know. It's different than merging restaurant point of sale or whatever it is. And, you know, find somebody with the deep healthcare expertise, not just general business. It makes a difference. It just does.
Usually.
Yeah, cool. Big topic. I think we at least made a dent. Very large topic, but I think we made a dent. So thank you for coming back on Practice Care and helping us understand this a bit better. I like the opportunistic. You get this unsolicited offer instead of getting annoyed. See the opportunity. Go learn. Maybe it's life changing. Who knows? But thanks for coming on and opening my eyes at least to this
My pleasure, Carl.
once we got the logic of the topic down. Couple of quick points before we wrap up. First, if you're like EJ or us and you serve private practice owners, or if you're one yourself, either way, you've figured out something on the business side of private practice, and don't overthink what that is. It could be something, usually is something very simple. But if you figured it out, I promise you others have not and are struggling with it. Come on Practice Care and tell us all about it. In the show notes for EJ's episode and every episode, there's a link. Take you under a minute. Tell us what's on your mind and we'll get you scheduled as soon as possible. And second, finally, subscribe to Practice Care. It's one word, Practice Care. Easy to find, new episode every week. The easiest way to stay up to date is to subscribe. Thanks very much. And until next time.